What's wrong, Dad? Wake up!
Why did you leave so suddenly?
There. This farm sells for a lot of money.
I'm so disappointed in you. I didn't expect you to just wait for your father to die.
The smell of disinfectant filled the recovery room at St. Helena Regional Hospital. The steady, slow beat of the heart monitor was like a knock on death's door. Henry Dalton lay there, his face pale and wrinkled, his breathing labored. The doctor had just said the heart surgery was a success, but he needed time to recover. In that dreamy moment between life and death, he remembered his land, Dalton Ridge Farm, where 4 generations of Daltons had worked the soil. When he opened his eyes, the first person he saw was his son, Luke. Luke's hair was neatly combed back, his shirt pressed and smelling of expensive perfume. Next to him was Tiffany, his new daughter-in-law, hunched over her phone, her face covered in flawless makeup. She took a picture with a bright smile and whispered, "Poor thing, but still beautiful." "Dad," Luke said softly, his voice full of false concern. "The doctor said you need to rest and not think about the farm anymore. I brought the paperwork for you to sign, just some medical insurance paperwork." Henry struggled to his feet. "What kind of paper is that?" "Just a medical power of attorney. I'll take care of the hospital fees and medicine. Don't worry, Dad." Luke smiled, a smile that sent a chill down Henry's spine, though he didn't know why. The pen tip trembled in his fingers. His heart was still pounding, his eyes growing blurry. His son urged him gently, "Dad, sign it. I'll handle everything. You trust me, right?" Henry signed. The ink was shaky, scrawled, almost like a cut. As Luke and Tiffany left the room, Tiffany leaned over, kissed her husband lightly on the cheek, and smiled softly. "We did it, baby." 3 days later, Henry was still lying unconscious. Outside his window, the Montana autumn leaves were turning a brilliant gold. Unbeknownst to him, at 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday, Luke Dalton, the only Dalton left besides him, was standing at First National Bank in Maple Hollow, holding a forged power of attorney signed by his father to sell Dalton Ridge Farm. 520 acres of ancestral land. Historic cabin, barns, machinery, a lifetime of memories, for a check worth $1.2 million. "Are you sure?" the bank broker asked. "This price is 2/3 below market." Luke smiled. "The old man's about to leave. Better close the deal quickly before he changes his mind." That same evening, Tiffany posted a photo on Instagram. She was standing in the middle of the blue sea, wearing a white bikini, holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Finally living the life we deserve." Blessed. New beginnings. Henry, in the hospital room, opened his eyes in the middle of the night. No one was there. He reached for the nurse call button, but stopped. Outside the window, moonlight fell on the empty chair where Luke had sat. A strange feeling crept into his chest, as if a part of his soul had been taken away. 2 weeks later, he was discharged. On the way home, his driver took him down the dirt road to the farm. From a distance, he saw a new sign on the gate, "Future Site of Dalton Commons, a Harborstone development." His heart sank. He stepped down and touched the ground. The grass was dry and still. The wind whistled through the pine trees. Everything familiar felt strange and cold. He walked to the porch. The old key no longer fit the lock. Someone had changed it. A white envelope lay on the doorstep, italicized on the front. "Thank you for your partnership, Mr. Dalton." Inside was a sales contract and a photo of the young Daltons, Luke and Tiffany, smiling in front of the ocean, glasses of wine in hand. Henry sank down on the steps. The pain in his heart was gone, but a deeper pain gripped his chest. He looked at the photograph, his fingers shaking with anger. All his life he had taught his son that land was not for sale, because it contained memories, sweat, and honor. And now, the last Dalton had sold that honor for 6 weeks of luxury on an island. Henry walked slowly through the silence of the house. He stopped at the oak dining table where the family had gathered for generations. Luke's chair was still there, but it was cold. He pulled it out, sat down, and poured himself a cup of strong black coffee. His hands shook, and the coffee spilled, staining the edge of the table. He looked out the window and saw the dark fields, the wind blowing the construction warning flags. Henry Dalton, the farmer betrayed by his own son, spoke in a hoarse voice. "Do they think I'm an illiterate old man who knows nothing but how to plow?" The moonlight reflected in his old eyes, cold, bright, and calculating. He took a deep, slow breath, then smiled faintly. "All right, Luke. If you choose coin over blood, I'll show you how much blood really costs." Outside, the wind blew across the abandoned field, howling like the cries of Dalton's ancestors, matching the strong heartbeat returning in Henry's chest. The pain was gone, but another storm was forming, a storm of justice, a storm of farmers, a storm of a father who wouldn't die as easily as they thought. When the hospital room door had closed, the sound of that door was more than just the end of an operation. It was the moment everything began to change. Henry returned to the cabin after 2 weeks in the hospital, but it felt as if it had been abandoned, even before he entered the operating room. The rickety porch was deserted, and the windows were covered with a thin layer of dust, like a veil over memories. The large oak dining table, where a lifetime of family conversation had once resounded, now bore only the marks of unwashed dishes and an empty chair. The scent of old coffee lingered, reminding him of lost, leisurely mornings. Below the flagpole, a new sign tilted toward the street. Future site of Dalton Commons, Harborstone Development. The black letters were as cold as a death notice. Henry paused, his hand reaching out to touch the wood, feeling the cracks and rusted metal. The pain didn't come with a scream. It came like cold water to his bones, slow, steady. Inside on the steps, there was an envelope. The postmark was swiped across. Office Inc. "Thank you for your partnership, Mr. Dalton." A thank you note for a transaction that had erased a generation. Henry tore it open with trembling fingers, pulled out the purchase contract, the calendar marking the October groundbreaking, and a small photo. Luke and Tiffany holding hands on the beach, smiling brightly over champagne. Their smile to the world. The photo to the world. And what remained? Acres, crops, his generation, to his life. Henry walked into the kitchen and looked at the old things. The sharpened knife, the dark iron scales, the wall clock that had stopped at some forgotten hour when Luke was still a child. He knelt down and placed the photograph on the ancestral altar, as if he wanted to see the reflection of his family in the glossy paper. But all he saw was blank space. He took a match, lit it, and placed the contract on the stove. The flames began to lick the edges of the paper. Printing melted, black coals fell like rain, Ashes flew up with the wind and scattered on the wooden floor. Henry looked at the ashes the way one listens to the cries of one's ancestors. Silent, long, heavy. Whispers began to spread quickly through Maple Hollow. People looked at him like an old legend awakened. Grocers winked. Neighbors avoided long looks. A few whispered, level, moderate. Strange, then quickly looked down, as if afraid of getting dirty. But there were other eyes, the eyes of young farmers, of people who had seen their faith wounded. They stopped. They listened deeply. They looked at Henry with respect, the kind born of what they had never known, that a simple man could hide a kingdom. Henry didn't cry. People often mistake tears for weakness. To him, tears were for cowards. Instead, he acted as he always did, quietly, carefully, with a plan. He went upstairs and opened the long locked door, not to find the files, he knew what was in them, but to retrieve a few essentials, an old calculator, a box of ink, an iron-bound book, and a pair of car keys he hadn't used in years. He called Rebecca Lawson. Her voice made him feel less alone. "Becky, I need the Harborstone files. I need everything come tomorrow morning." She answered without hesitation. "You say the word. I'll take care of the rest." Henry hung up the phone feeling a little better. He had allies. He had a plan. The despair was no longer a heavy stone in his chest. It was a glowing ember, ready to burst into flames. That night, Henry sat at his wooden table and opened the forgotten papers. He flipped through the ledgers, reading numbers Luke had never seen before. Old contracts, registered trademarks, distributor agreements. He closed his eyes and saw the whole picture. The fields across the state, the soil sensors, the overseas sales contracts, the research money, all of it building up Greencore, the company he had secretly built. He had hidden it because he feared people would see only the money, not the man. Now that very concealment had saved him from being robbed completely. The next morning, he walked around the fence, touching the ground with calloused hands. The ground was cold. The smell of old fertilizer hung thick in the air. Insects hummed like the ticking of a clock. He stood in the middle of the field, listening. Over the years, each season had taught him a different language. When to cut, when to wait, when to use the sword. Now, the earth whispered back, "It is not property to be sold. It is a promise, a memory, a responsibility." Henry knew that what his son thought was instant possession would not be easy to keep. Luke believed in convenience, in the illusion that paper was everything. But Henry also knew the truth. The law was a tool, and he held something far stronger: time, reputation, and truth. He held the charred ash in his fingers, examining the powder as if reading a map. Ashes of contract, ashes of betrayal. But ashes were also seeds, something that could be replanted and sprout into truth. He stood up, laced his boots tighter, locked the door carefully. A month, a week, a day of work lay ahead. Not just the pursuit of justice, but the reclaiming of a past and the protection of a future. Henry walked out of the house, his long shadow a challenge along the dirt road. Before he left, he stopped at the steps and whispered, as if to himself and to his deceased family, "If they think I'm just an old man plowing the fields, They're mistaken. They have not heard the earth speak. That night, the rain fell on the roof of Dalton Ridge like the beat of an old song. But something in Henry was different from every other night. After the fire burned the letter into ashes, he no longer trembled. The pain gave way to something cold, hard, and precise, like when he sharpened the plow blade of an old time, each stroke chipping away at the softness. He turned on the oil lamp. The yellow light bounced off the old wooden wall and onto a heavy bookshelf. In the far corner, hidden behind a thick layer of dust, was a small door, its dark wood surface almost invisible. The door had not been opened in 40 years. Henry put his hand on the cold metal lock. From his pocket, he took out a small bronze key, engraved with 2 letters, H, D. The lock clicked dryly, like a time lock being released. He pushed the door open. A stream of dry, heavy air filled the room, smelling of old paper mixed with computer oil. The light shone on filing cabinets reaching to the ceiling, rolls of blueprints and patents, neatly arranged in leather covers. The legacy was still there, waiting, alive. In the center of the room was a scratched steel desk, covered in dust thick enough for Henry to write his name on. He flipped the switch. An old fluorescent light hissed and came alive, casting a pale glow across the walls. Behind a glass panel hung the 2012 cover of Forbes magazine. Henry Dalton, the hidden visionary behind Greencore Systems, Inc. He was pictured in his old overalls, holding a soil sample, with the Greencore logo shining faintly in the background. The subheading read, "From Montana Farm to $500 million ag-tech empire." Henry stared at the photo for a long time. He had never shown it to anyone, not even his wife or his son. As Greencore grew, he'd chosen to step back from executive control, keeping only his stock and his voting rights. He wanted to live the life of a farmer, not a billionaire. He wanted people to greet him for who he was, not for what he had. But now, that very choice had made his son believe he was a poor, confused old man. Henry opened a drawer. Inside was a thick, plastic-bound file. On the cover, Greencore Systems, Incorporation and Subsidiaries. He flipped through the pages slowly, reading each name like an echo of the past. BioHarvest LLC, SeedSense Analytics, Harborstone Development. Each name felt like a memory resurfacing. When he reached the last page, he stopped and smiled, half bitter, half sharp. Harborstone Development LLC, owner Greencore Systems, Inc. He leaned back in his chair. "So that's it," he whispered. "My clever son just sold ancestral land to his father's company." Henry stood up and opened the window. The rain had stopped. The wind swept softly across the hills. He looked out at the distant fields, rows of corn still standing proud after the storm. His mind drifted through the years, sleepless nights researching soil sensors, the first sale of his invention, the handshake with his first Seattle investor. He had built that empire quietly, to help people like himself, poor farmers, weathered and worn. But now, he realized that same technology could do something else. It could save or punish. He pulled an old landline from the closet, plugged it in, and dialed a number he'd known by heart for 20 years. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. Rebecca Lawson. "Becky, it's me, Henry Dalton." "Oh my God, Henry, I heard you were hospitalized. I thought you'd retired." "Not yet. I need you to do something for me. Quick! Her tone changed. Crisp, professional. Just say it. I need all of Harborstone's legal documents. Ownership papers, stock options, leases, everything for the past 3 months. And Becky, yes? Prepare us to meet in public. There was a silence. Then Rebecca chuckled softly through the line. So, you've made up your mind. You're going to do it your way. There's no other way, Henry said. This time, it's not just about the land. It's about teaching him what true value means. He hung up. Only the pattering of rain on the iron frame remained. Henry walked closer to the Forbes cover and looked into his own eyes. The eyes in the photo were gentle, humble. His real eyes now were colder, deeper. He touched the glass frame and whispered, I'll show him tomorrow. Does he think selling the land is the end? He doesn't know who he just sold it to. He turned off the light, closed the door, locked it carefully, and slipped the key into his pocket. As he crossed the steps, lightning flashed outside, illuminating the old ceiling beams. The rain was still falling, but inside him, another storm was brewing. Fierce and purposeful. He knew when the morning came, Maple Hollow would never again be the peaceful town it once was. If one day you discover that someone you love has betrayed your trust, what would you do? Stay silent. To keep the family from breaking apart? Level, moderate. Expose them, even if it means destroying everything. Or some, like Henry, turn pain into a plan and make them fall into the trap they dug for you. The morning after his call with Rebecca, Henry barely slept. He spent the day reviewing files, signing internal orders, confirming his authority inside Green Corps' system. As the sun set, the Montana sky turned a deep coppery red. Henry put on his old coat and walked out of the house with chilling calm. He knew there would be a town meeting that night, a public spectacle Luke had been preparing for weeks. And he also knew it would be there, that the storm he had hidden inside for 40 years would finally be unleashed. The Maple Hollow Council chamber was brightly lit. Wooden benches filled with farmers, shopkeepers, reporters, and onlookers, all gathered to witness something historic. The Daltons selling their ancestral land. On stage, Luke Dalton stood, navy suit, red tie, smile rehearsed in front of a mirror. 4 generations of my family have farmed this land, he said. But times change. My father, who loved this land more than anyone, understood that Maple Hollow's future lay not just in agriculture, but in development. Selling Dalton Ridge Farm was a community decision, not a personal one. Applause broke out. Tiffany, sitting in the front row, raised her phone. Her voice was sweet, almost rehearsed. Live at the session. We're proud to share the Dalton legacy with the new generation. Hashtag modern legacy. Luke continued, voice strong, confident, even adding a slight tremor, as if emotion were creeping in. When he said, "My father approved," some people in the audience bowed their heads, touched, believing the lie. Then, the old wooden door creaked open. The sound of slow, steady footsteps echoed across the chamber floor. Every head turned. Henry Dalton stood there, white hair, brown coat, his face pale from the hospital, but his eyes, sharp as a freshly forged knife. The room fell silent. Luke froze mid-sentence. The air crackled. And in that silence, the storm Henry had carried within him finally arrived. Luke laughed nervously. You misunderstood, Dad. It was a figure of speech. I mean, you understand my decision. Henry cut him off, his tone low, deliberate. If you want to speak figuratively, use poetry. Don't use legalese. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Council Chairman Mr. Myers forced a smile. Mr. Dalton, if there is disagreement within the family, perhaps... Henry turned slowly. It's not a disagreement, Mr. Myers. His voice hardened. It's cheating. And tonight, this town has the right to hear the truth. He walked to the podium. Luke tried to block him, but Henry was already there, inches from the microphone. His voice was steady, like iron. Did you forget to tell them who owns Harborstone? He entered, unhurried, each step deliberate, steady, like a man who had already made peace with the storm inside him. The light caught the old Dalton Ridge Farmers Association badge still pinned to his chest. He said nothing until he reached the front row. The hall was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Father, Luke stammered. What are you doing here? Henry raised his head, his voice calm, but it cut through the silence like a blade. I heard you lie. The whole room froze. Tiffany lowered her phone. Even the cameraman stopped recording. Henry's eyes locked on his son. You just said I agreed, right? He stepped closer. I ask again. Agreed to what? The room held its breath. Someone gasped. Tiffany froze. The cameras started again, but no one dared to move. Henry spoke clearly, not loud, but with a weight that filled the room. The Harborstone Company that my son just sold the land to is a subsidiary of Greencore Systems, the corporation I founded 40 years ago. Gasps, whispers, chaos. Luke's face turned pale. Father, what are you saying? Are you joking? Henry tilted his head slightly. Do you think a man lying on a sickbed can't own anything? Or do you think a farmer doesn't know what a share is? Mr. Myers raised his hand. Mr. Dalton, please, Henry interrupted again. No, need for order. There's only need for truth. He took a thick envelope from his pocket and placed it on the podium. This, he said, is the Greencore title deed, original and electronic. And here, the Harborstone merger agreement, signed Henry Dalton, founder. 74% of the shares. My son has just sold his family land to his father's company. The crowd erupted. Reporters stood, flashes burst, voices shouted in disbelief. Tiffany's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor. The screen cracked like a broken mirror. Henry waited for the noise to die. Then he looked around the hall. Thank you all for coming, he said quietly. I just wanted to prove there are things you shouldn't price without knowing who truly owns them. The room fell into a heavy silence again. Luke couldn't meet his father's eyes. The light above them drew deep lines across Henry's face, lines carved by years of work, betrayal, and endurance. He turned away, his voice almost a whisper, but it carried through the room. I didn't just sell land tonight. I sold my own beliefs. He walked down the aisle. Every head turned to follow. The sound of his boots echoed against the wooden floor. Behind him, someone whispered, "He's not just a farmer." As he stepped outside, the wind picked up, cold, fierce. The storm clouds gathered above the ridge. Henry looked up at the dark sky. "Every storm begins with a speck of dust," he murmured. "And tonight, the storm has just begun." If you were Henry, what would you do, eh? Forgive him and let life teach him. B. Reclaim everything. Let him taste justice. C. Or be like Henry. Stay silent and let the truth speak for itself. The silence in the hall had barely settled when the door creaked open once more. A woman entered, tall, composed, her eyes sharp, precise, the kind that had seen too many courtrooms. Rebecca Lawson. In her hand, a black leather briefcase. Inside, not just documents, but a sharpened legal knife. And with that, the second act of the Dalton storm had begun. Henry didn't need a signal. She walked straight up to the podium, calm, composed, but each word that followed struck the floor like a hammer on iron. "Counsel," she began. "I am Rebecca Lawson, legal counsel for Greencore Systems. I'm here at the request of Mr. Henry Dalton to clarify a few points regarding the Dalton Commons project." The crowd froze. Tiffany squeezed her husband's hand. Luke tried to look calm, but sweat gathered on his temple. Rebecca placed the briefcase on the table. A sharp click echoed as she opened it. Inside, dozens of files, each stamped with a bright red seal. This, the first file, is the Certificate of Incorporation and Ownership Structure for Harborstone Development, LLC. Harborstone is not an independent company. It is a subsidiary of Greencore Systems, Incorporated. The room exploded with noise. The chairman's gavel hit the desk 3 times before silence returned. Rebecca's tone remained steady, but her gaze locked on Luke. "And Greencore Systems is legally owned by Mr. Henry Dalton, founder, controlling shareholder with 74% of the shares." Chaos again. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Murmurs spread like wildfire. In the middle of it all, Henry stood still, calm in the eye of the storm, one hand resting on the wooden platform. He turned to his son, voice low but every syllable precise. "Listen carefully, Luke. You just sold the family land to your father's company." Luke's face drained of color. His lips trembled. No words came out. Tiffany's phone slipped from her hand, the sound of shattering glass ending her illusions of wealth. Rebecca opened another folder. Her voice sharpened like a blade. "The transfer contract that Luke Dalton signed 3 weeks ago was made for $1.2 million. The appraised value of the Dalton Ridge land? $3.8 million. He sold the property for nearly 70% below market value, and the buyer was his own father." Laughter broke from the back row. Someone shouted, "Good heavens, that old man's a genius!" The murmur grew, half shock, half admiration. Luke slammed his hands on the table. "No way, Dad! How could you? You don't have money. You're just..." Henry's eyes flared. "Just a farmer?" "Yes, but a farmer who built Greencore." He stepped forward. "As for me, I have education, money, even a smartphone, but no memory. I forgot who taught me how to keep a promise." Rebecca turned back to the council. "I think it's clear," she said. "The Dalton Commons project by Harborstone is null and void. The legal owner, the landowner, never approved the sale." Applause erupted. President Myers tried to stop it, but couldn't. He only looked at Henry, stunned, respectful. Henry faced the crowd, his voice low, carrying weight beyond words. All my life, I've stayed quiet. I let people think I was poor, so I'd never have to see anyone bow to money. But today, I'm not here to talk about money. I'm here to remind everyone, honor has no market price. He walked toward his son, 1/2 meter between them. Luke reeked of cheap wine, a scent that didn't belong in a Dalton home. You think selling is the end, Luke? Henry said softly, his voice carrying quiet thunder. No. You just signed a debt contract with your own blood. Luke's voice cracked. What do you want? Money? Or do you want me to kneel and beg? Henry's eyes locked on his son. No. I want you to understand. Pride has interest. And when the time comes, it will be paid back. The hall fell silent again. Yellow light painted the faces of father and son, one old, one young, one tormented, one shattered. Henry turned to the council. The meeting can end, he said quietly. The real story continues outside. He stepped down from the podium. The doors opened. A cold Montana breeze swept through the room, scattering papers. Behind him, Luke stood frozen. Tiffany knelt, gathering the shards of her phone, tears falling soundlessly. Henry paused on the steps, looking out at the night. The land knows how to repay, he whispered. It also knows how to collect debts. If you were in Henry's shoes, betrayed by your own blood, what would you choose? A. Forgive, to keep your bloodline. B. Reclaim everything, including your honor. Time with 300 mounds, almost C. Make the traitor suffer the weight of his own actions. The air inside Maple Hollow Hall still trembled with shock. When the whispers faded, Henry stepped back onto the wooden platform, uninvited. He took off his glasses, laid them on the table, and looked around the room, where every single eye was on him. The storm was not over yet. Tonight's story is not over, he said, his voice hoarse but clear, like the sound of a plow breaking through dry earth. Because justice does not stop at telling the truth. It begins with paying the price. Luke stood frozen. Tiffany clutched her bag, tears streaming, her fingers tightening around her husband's hand. But he didn't respond. Henry raised his arm slowly, pointing toward the corner of the hall, at the sign that read, Dalton Commons, Future of Maple Hollow. From now on, he said, his tone heavy, deliberate, that land is no one's future. It will return to what it was, farmland, rice paddies, corn, and sweat. Dalton Ridge Farm will return to being Dalton Ridge Farm. And the so-called Dalton Commons project. He paused, his eyes narrowing. I hereby declare it canceled. The crowd erupted in brief applause, hesitant, unsure. The chairman's pen trembled above the minutes. Rebecca Lawson rose from her seat, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. She handed a thick folder to President Myers. I have prepared the legal documents, she said calmly. Inside, enough evidence of forgery, embezzlement, and fraud in real estate transactions. Then she turned toward Luke, her voice suddenly firm, echoing through the hall. Under Montana Code Section 165, it is a first-degree crime to use a false power of attorney to transfer property that is not yours. Add financial fraud, and you will face prosecution. Luke gripped the edge of the table, shaking. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help you get rid of the burden. Henry's eyes burned cold. Help me? He said, voice rising only slightly. Help me by selling my ancestors' blood and sweat. For vacation money? Tiffany broke down completely, falling to her knees. Mr. Dalton, I didn't know anything. It was all Luke's idea. I just posted a few videos. Henry's gaze turned to her, sharp as frost on a winter morning. You didn't know, he said slowly. But you still filmed the sponsorship clip. Still said, life is just beginning. If you didn't know. He leaned forward slightly. How did you tag the wine brand Ring and Resort? The hall filled with murmurs, some gasps, others sighs. Reporters typed faster, the smell of sweat and fear mixing thick in the air. Rebecca stepped forward again. And according to Green Core Systems' internal policy, she said, Mr. Henry Dalton, the controlling shareholder, has the right to suspend all commercial contracts of its subsidiaries. She turned her head toward Luke. That means your employer, Midwest Farm Supply, has already received notice of your termination this morning. They no longer wish to be associated with someone under investigation for fraud. Luke exploded. You can't do that. You're ruining my life. Henry didn't flinch. He simply answered quietly. I ruined it a long time ago, when I signed my name. The room was silent. Only Tiffany's cries echoed, like metal striking stone. Henry bent down, picked up the broken phone she had dropped. The screen was cracked, light flickering weakly. He turned it toward himself and saw the last post. A glass of wine on the beach, captioned, Sometimes you have to take control of your destiny. He set the phone down gently. His voice came low, heavy, final. Yes, and tonight, your destiny will be written by your own hands. The council chairman stepped forward nervously. Mr. Dalton, how do you want us to continue? Henry looked straight at him. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp, I will hand all these documents to the Gallatin County prosecutor. They'll handle the rest. He turned toward his son, his tone steady, stripped of emotion. From now on, don't say I ruined your life. I only took back what you stole. He gathered the papers and stepped down from the podium. As he passed Tiffany, she reached out, trembling. Please, spare Luke. He only made one mistake. Henry paused, his voice even as the wind over the plains. Mistakes are when people don't know. This, he looked directly at Luke, was a choice, and every choice has its price. He turned and walked out. The wind swept in from the fields, carrying the scent of fresh earth and autumn chill. The door slammed shut behind him, like the final word of a verdict. If it were you, when someone you love betrays you and begs for forgiveness, what would you do? A. Forgive them, because they are still your blood. B. Let the law decide and stay silent. C. Like Henry, let them pay for their own choices. The following spring, the sun rose later than usual, but Henry woke before dawn. He hadn't returned to that hall since that night. The prosecutors had done their work. The press had done the rest. As for him, he simply waited for the snow to melt. 3 months later, the white frost over Dalton Ridge finally broke. The ground breathed again, raw, dark, alive. The iron posts that once bore the words Harbor Stone Development were torn from the soil. The barricades and the future business park signs were dragged away by bulldozers on a frigid morning that smelled of justice. Now, where there had been concrete, there were half-plowed furrows and tractor marks. Henry stood there, holding a handful of earth, cold, damp, real. He closed his eyes. For the first time in a year, he smelled life again. Not money, not ambition, just life. In town, people began to talk about him differently. They no longer whispered, "Old man weirdo." They called him by his real name again, Farmer Dalton. And when the local paper ran the headline, Green Corps announces Dalton Legacy Scholarship Fund, $2 million for Montana agriculture students. Henry just smiled. "I don't need anyone to remember the case," he told Rebecca. "I just want kids to know that farming isn't a shortcut to poverty." Green Corps sent Dalton Ridge 3 sets of next-generation soil sensors, the same ones Henry himself had designed, but never tested on his own land. He assembled them carefully, kneeling in the dirt, pushing each sensor into the ground. The small lights blinked. Green, steady. The screen read, "Moisture, 43%. Soil ready for planting." The wind blew across the open fields from the Helena Mountains. For the first time in months, he heard the soft rustle of young corn leaves brushing together. It was faint, but to Henry, it was the most beautiful music in the world. He removed his gloves, let the dirt cling to his skin. The first drops of sweat fell into the furrow, a greeting to the new harvest. That afternoon, Rebecca drove up. She stood beside her car, coat pulled tight, watching Henry work. "You work as if you've never been through a lawsuit," she said. Henry stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, and smiled. "I'm just doing what I was born to do." Rebecca nodded. "The company wants you to take back the honorary chairmanship." Henry shook his head. "No need. I want every spring, when this land comes back to life, it carries the name Dalton, not on a sign, but in its breath." She squinted toward the golden field. "So, are you satisfied now?" Henry's eyes followed the horizon. "Satisfied? Not exactly. But I feel peaceful. And in life, peace is more precious than victory." As sunset slid across the wooden roof, light passed through the window where his wife's picture once hung. Henry walked slowly, his hands still streaked with mud, and stopped before the small altar. He placed a young ear of rice upon it and whispered softly, "It's me, Evelyn. The earth has returned. It's breathing again." The wind outside answered, a quiet, rustling hymn. In the last light, his face softened. The wrinkles deepened, but his eyes grew light, as if an old debt had finally been repaid. He knew the past could never be erased, but it could be cleansed by work, by real labor. As darkness fell, Henry sat by the wooden fence, watching the first stars rise in the Montana sky. He smiled, a smile he hadn't seen on his own face in years. "I don't need to win," he murmured. "I just need to make the land live again." If it were you, Tom, after taking everything back, what would you choose for yourself? A. Continue seeking revenge to satisfy yourself. B. Let go and find peace, like Henry. C. Save your strength to sow a new season for others and for yourself. A year had passed since Dalton Ridge was reborn. The fields were green again, as if they had never been betrayed. But Henry Dalton knew The earth could heal. People could not. The cracks in the heart, like plow marks after drought, could only be mended with time and labor. One morning in early summer, Henry drove his old pickup down the dirt road south of Maple Hollow. He stopped at a small handmade sign, Community Work Program, Luke Dalton. Far across the field, a young man bent low, shoveling soil under the hot sun. His back was soaked with sweat, his neck burned red. It was Luke. Nearby, local farmers showed him how to spread fertilizer. Without pity, without resentment, they treated him like a true apprentice. Henry turned off the engine, leaned against the hood, and watched quietly. The hum of the tractor and the rustle of young corn merged into one soft song, a song of renewal. Rebecca had told him that Luke was completing his hours of re-education, repaying every cent of his debt under the agreement. Henry had only nodded then, and said nothing more. At noon, when the bell rang for recess, Luke put down his hoe and looked up. Their eyes met, father and son. They hadn't seen each other since the trial. No anger, no courtroom walls, just silence. The silence of things left unsaid. Henry stepped forward, carrying no resentment, only the tired grace of someone who had weathered a storm. He looked at Luke's hands, rough, dark, real. They were his own hands, 30 years younger. "How long have you been here?" Henry asked quietly. Luke replied, 11 months, 3 more weeks to go. They said I could make it. Henry nodded. "That's good. Remember what I told you when you were little? The earth never betrays those who bow down to it." Luke smiled faintly. "Now I understand." They stood in silence again. The wind carried the smell of soil and summer. Henry looked at the wide field, bathed in late golden light. "You used to call me a poor old man," he said slowly. "Now you know. Poverty isn't in the pocket. It's in the heart." Luke lowered his head, his voice breaking. "Father, I've repaid almost everything, but I can never repay you." Henry placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a firm, forgiving touch. "No one's asking you to repay me. You only owe yourself the chance to live right." The wind lifted, turning the dust into ribbons of light. A tractor roared in the distance, its hum blending with the sound of growing corn, like the first song of a new season. Henry's voice was quiet, but steady. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's giving each other a chance to grow again." Luke said nothing. He bent down, picked up the hoe, and kept working. Henry watched for a long time, then turned back toward his truck. Before leaving, he looked once more at the field, rows of young corn glowing in sunlight. The land that had once been sold cheaply, now alive again. The pickup rumbled down the dirt road. Henry rolled the window down. The wind rushed in, carrying the smell of soil, sweat, and hope. He smiled. "At last, the earth has taught me what I could not." If one day the person who betrayed you learns to bow down, to work, to rebuild, to make things right, what would you do? A, open your heart and let them make it right. B, keep your distance, because trust is fragile. C, give them a second chance, but never forget the lesson that broke you.